Today's story isn't just a courtroom drama, it's a battle for the soul of justice in America. You're about to witness a woman stand alone against a machine built to silence her and win. So sit back, turn up the volume, and get ready. Because this one will stay with you long after the gavel drops. The ceiling fans in Charleston Hall spun slow and heavy, pushing stale air through the grand courtroom like a whisper of old ghosts. Sunlight poured through narrow windows, casting streaks of gold across the floor as if divine judgment itself were watching. Karoline Leavitt stood at the witness stand, posture straight, jaw set, her sharp navy blazer and pearl earrings a subtle defiance in a room built to break the uninvited. Across the bench, Judge Everhart adjusted his robe with practiced arrogance. His silver hair was combed with the same precision as his sentences, controlled, clipped, and concealing. To those in the gallery he was Charleston's crown jewel, a man raised on Scotch, legacy, and the Constitution. But Karoline knew better. She had the documents, the wire transfers, the names, the dates. She wasn't here to win a point. She was here to pull the mask off a man who'd made a career of making truth a performance. "Mr. Everhart," she began, her voice low but unwavering, "before I answer any more of your questions, I'd like to submit one piece of evidence into the record." A pause. The courtroom held its breath. Reporters shifted. Veterans in the back row, the kind with service pins and folded arms, leaned in. Everhart's eyes narrowed. "This is not your courtroom, Mrs. Leavitt. We are not here for dramatics." Karoline didn't blink. She placed a folder gently on the edge of the stand and opened it with deliberate care. Inside, the top sheet was already marked for Exhibit A. She lifted it high enough for the entire courtroom to see. "A $1,200,000 0 cents wire transfer," she said, "from the Renaissance Fund, coded under Liberty Dominion's private channel, moved through Pinebridge Holdings and deposited into a nonprofit chaired by this court's presiding judge, Everhart." The words didn't explode. They sank like lead in water. Gasps were muffled. The clerk looked up. The bailiff shifted his weight. And for the first time, Judge Everhart didn't speak. Not immediately. "You dare," he began, voice controlled, but the quiver betrayed him. "I do," Karoline cut in, her voice gaining power. "And I have 4 more documents just like this. 4 more instances of your honor directing justice with a price tag." Everhart's gavel slammed once, twice. The sound cracked through the room like a rifle shot. "You're out of order," he barked, rising to his feet. Karoline met his eyes. "No, Judge, you are." A murmur broke out from the gallery. A man in work boots stood slowly. A woman with gray hair whispered, "God help her," under her breath. But no one left. No one looked away. In the corner of the room, a tall man in a dark gray suit with military posture, Caleb Vaughn, watched without blinking. He said nothing, but he took note. His hand rested inside his coat. His jaw was stone. Sentinel had been alerted. Everhart leaned forward, his voice now ice. "This court does not take kindly to political theater, Mrs. Leavitt. You may wear the title of White House press secretary, but you stand here as a witness. I suggest you remember that." "I haven't forgotten for a moment," Karoline replied. "Because the truth doesn't need a title, it just needs a spine." Behind her, Juliet Moore, a journalist whose own career Everhart had silenced years ago, nodded slightly, her pen frozen midair. She'd seen show trials. She'd seen cowards with gavels. But this was different. This was a reckoning. Everhart stepped back, clutching the edge of the bench as if to steady himself. "Court is in recess," he snapped. 20 minutes, then we return to actual proceedings." He stormed out without waiting for the bailiff. Karoline remained standing. The courtroom buzzed, but didn't move. She gently placed the folder back into her briefcase and turned slowly toward the gallery. Her eyes scanned the faces, not for support, but for confirmation. They saw her, they saw him, and they finally saw the line he crossed. 3 months before Charleston Hall erupted into national headlines, Karoline Leavitt sat alone in a government sedan, parked just outside the historic Battery District, staring at her phone. Rain tapped gently against the windshield, blurring the colonial homes beyond it. On her screen, an email. No subject line, no greeting, just one line and a file attachment. You trusted the wrong court. Start with Liberty Dominion. She didn't know who sent it. She only knew the moment she opened the attachment, scanned that banking record, everything changed. The PDF showed a 7-figure wire transfer. The sender, Renaissance Fund. The recipient, a non-profit called the Oak Foundation, known for sponsoring civic lectures and judicial scholarships across South Carolina. At the bottom, a name appeared. Quiet, but devastating. Malcolm Everhart. Karoline had spoken at one of those events just last year. At first, it felt impossible. Everhart was a legend, a war veteran, federal judge for over 2 decades, known for upholding the law with iron resolve. He'd ruled on campaign finance cases that helped define Karoline's early days in Washington. But the math didn't lie, nor did the routing number. She needed perspective. And there was only one person she trusted to give it without political spin, her husband, Nicholas Riccio. That night, she returned to their apartment above an old bookstore off King Street. Nicholas was already home, sleeves rolled up, sifting through contract files for a land deal in Boston. The moment she closed the door, her face said it all. "I'm not going to like this, am I?" he asked, standing slowly. "No," Karoline replied, placing the file in front of him. Nicholas leaned over the kitchen counter and read in silence. His eyes didn't move much. He was trained for this. A former private equity analyst who left Wall Street early to start a real estate fund, Nicholas had seen these kinds of structures before. Nonprofits masking payouts, foundations shielding shell companies. He finally looked up. "This isn't just dirty, it's directional." "What do you mean?" "They're not just hiding money, they're steering policy. Whoever built this doesn't want to buy influence, they want to own outcomes. And Karoline, look at the PAC's name, Liberty Dominion." The name rang familiar, too familiar. It was the same super PAC that had offered to sponsor a Get Out the Vote campaign in Georgia, one she rejected last fall when the funding seemed suspiciously fast. No oversight, no paperwork trail. "They're everywhere," she said, her voice a whisper, "and Everhart is part of it." Nicholas leaned in, jaw tight. "If you go after him, it won't just be the judge you're facing. These people, they don't file lawsuits. They make you disappear beneath headlines and scandal." She nodded. "I know." He reached for her hand. "Then we need help. Someone who's already lost something to this." That's when she thought of Juliette Moore. Juliette had been a force in her time, an award-winning investigative reporter for the Washington Post, known for her deep dives into lobbying, corruption, and political shadow networks. But 2 years ago, she'd been publicly ridiculed and discredited after publishing an exposé about judicial favoritism in the South. The centerpiece of that article? Judge Malcolm Everhart. Karoline hadn't spoken to her since, but that night she sent one message. "You were right, I need you." Juliette replied within 10 minutes. "Meet me tomorrow, no phones, no names." They met at a pier cafe just off Shim Creek, where the air smelled of salt and ink. Juliette wore sunglasses and a scarf, more spy than journalist now, but the fire in her voice hadn't dulled. "I warned everyone," she said, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. They laughed, buried the story. "Everhart didn't just ruin my career, he buried the entire paper in legal hell. And now here you are." Karoline placed the documents between them. "This time, we bring receipts." Juliette scanned the file, then looked up, eyes sharp. "You're taking on Sentinel," she said. Karoline blinked. "What is that?" Juliette exhaled a long, heavy breath. "Not what, who. The name behind the money. Behind Liberty Dominion. Behind Everhart. You think you're digging up corruption? You're walking into a machine built to erase accountability." Karoline sat back, heart pounding. "Then we burn it to the ground." Karoline nodded. "We'll need fire. And witnesses." By the time Charleston's summer heat settled over the rooftops like a heavy quilt, Karoline Leavitt had found her allies not through political favors or think tank dinners, but through a quiet, mutual understanding. Some truths were too big to face alone. The first was Liam Tran, a cyber forensics analyst who once worked on Pentagon contract audits before dropping off the grid. He now lived outside Savannah, Georgia, in a rented cottage rigged with signal blockers and backup generators, the kind of man who spoke in code, even while ordering coffee. Juliet vouched for him. He's been burned before, she said. But he's not afraid of fire. They found Liam cleaning the rust off an old ham radio, cigarette balanced on the edge of a coffee mug. He barely looked up when Karoline entered. "You the one poking Sentinel?" he asked. "I'm the one trying to expose it," she answered. "Same thing," he muttered, then finally stood and offered a calloused hand. "If I help you, there's no turning back." Karoline nodded. "I've already passed that point." Liam didn't need much, just the packet of documents, the USB from Juliet, and 30 minutes of silence. When he emerged from the back room, his face was pale. "They're laundering campaign money through judicial charities," he said. "I found 5 more shell companies nested under different bank codes, all connected to the Renaissance Fund." He pulled up a screen. "This one, Southbridge Legal Initiative, is funneling cash directly to Everhart's Court Foundation, weekly. That's not a donation, that's a salary in disguise." Karoline leaned in. "Can you trace the money back to Liberty Dominion?" Liam clicked open another window. "Already did, but here's the kicker. See this tag?" He pointed to a tiny line of text in a metadata log. "Approval. Sentinel." That was when Karoline knew Juliet had been right. Sentinel wasn't just a nickname. It was the final stop, the unseen hand behind everything. But to bring down a network like this, evidence wasn't enough. They needed testimony, and for that Karoline turned to the only man who dared whisper about Liberty Dominion before this began: Derek Wallace. Derek had been a mid-level fundraiser for the PAC, working quietly behind the scenes in Colombia. He hadn't come forward after the first email, but after the press began sniffing around the Liberty Dominion board, he reached out through a burner account. "I have files, but I won't talk unless it's in person." They met him in an old veterans lodge outside Charleston. Derek looked like a man unraveling, suit 2 sizes too big, fingers twitching, eyes constantly scanning the parking lot. "I knew it was crooked," he said, pushing a flash drive across the table. "But when the payments started coming in from non-profit accounts overseas, and Everhart's name showed up in the transfer memos, I couldn't pretend anymore." "What are they paying for?" Juliet asked. "Legal outcomes," Derek replied. "Sentinel's been buying verdicts, dismissing lawsuits, silencing whistleblowers. They even pitched me on setting up a fake donation fund in Texas." That's when I walked. Karoline took the drive gently. "Do you have proof of their contact with Sentinel?" Derek hesitated, then nodded. "There's a memo, coded, but it references a meeting between Liberty Dominion leadership and a federal judge. The code name is Raven." Juliet froze. That was Everhart's code name from my original story, the one they discredited me over. Derek leaned back, defeated. "Then I'm already dead in the water." Karoline didn't let the fear show. "You're not dead. You're the reason this breaks wide open." There was one more ally they needed, Isabel Reyes, former finance assistant at Liberty Dominion. She'd been fired a year earlier for refusing to process a suspicious transfer to a PAC-funded charity in the Karoline tracked her down working at a public library in Beaufort, living under her mother's maiden name. At first, Isabel refused to meet, but when Karoline arrived in person, no aides, no cameras, Isabel agreed to speak. "I didn't sign up to clean blood off ledgers," she said, pulling a wrinkled file from her backpack. "They're paying off lawsuits in South Carolina and calling them outreach grants." Karoline opened the file, her chest tightening. Every page was a nail in the coffin. Internal emails, routing numbers, bribe requests. "I can't testify," Isabel said. "Not unless you can protect my brother. He's still in Charleston." Karoline nodded. "We'll get him out, and when this is over, your name will mean something again." That night, back in their safe house, Karoline laid the documents on the table. Juliet looked at her, voice low. "Are you ready for war?" "No," Karoline said. "But I'm ready to finish one." It happened just after midnight. Karoline Leavitt was leaving the safe house. Nothing flashy, just a borrowed sedan and a quick stop at the local 24-hour diner for coffee and breath. The street was dead quiet, her heels clicking against wet pavement. The air was heavy, southern and still, the kind that told you rain wasn't far but trouble might already be close. She barely noticed the car at first, parked across the street, lights off, engine silent, just enough condensation on the windshield to blur the silhouette inside. Her instincts kicked in, the political ones first, the ones trained to spot a reporter or a camera flash. But this was different. This wasn't press. This was stillness. Intentional. Watching. Karoline didn't break pace. She unlocked the sedan and slid inside, shutting the door without glancing back. But before her fingers hit the ignition, there was a knock. 2 taps. Her breath froze. Standing outside the driver's side window was a man in a charcoal gray coat. Tall, broad-shouldered, military cut to his jawline. Calm. Like someone who didn't need to prove strength because he was strength. He didn't raise his voice when he spoke. He didn't have to. "Mrs. Leavitt," he said through the glass, his tone flat but surgical. "You've made some powerful enemies." Karoline didn't flinch. She rolled the window down an inch. "And you are?" "Someone who ensures lines don't get crossed." She stared at him. "You're with Sentinel." He smiled faintly. Not denial, not confirmation. Just enough to keep it ambiguous. The kind of smile you see right before a storm rolls in. "I'm here to deliver a message," he said, reaching slowly into his coat. Not for a weapon, but for a small envelope. He placed it on her windshield. "Stop digging," he continued. "You've gone far enough. Go back to D.C., play your press secretary games, and we'll forget you ever stepped into Charleston's shadow." Karoline met his gaze. "And if I don't?" He took one step closer, lowering his voice until it was barely audible over the hum of distant traffic. "Then I won't be knocking next time." For a moment the only sound was the ticking of her hazard light she'd accidentally bumped on. He gave a polite nod, turned and walked back to his car. She didn't move. Not until his taillights faded into the fog. Inside the envelope was a single photo, grainy, black and white, clearly taken from a surveillance vantage. It showed her husband Nicholas walking out of his Boston office 2 days earlier, circled in red. Not a threat, a promise. She drove straight back to the safe house, her pulse pounding not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was physical, tactical. Sentinel had boots on the ground. Juliet was waiting at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee untouched beside her open laptop. She looked up the moment Karoline entered, taking in the color drained from her face. "You saw him," Juliet said. Karoline nodded and tossed the photo onto the table. Juliet studied it, then leaned back in her chair. "That's Caleb Vaughn, former private contractor, worked Blackfire detail in Kabul, then did asset security for 2 PACs under investigation. No confirmed ties to Sentinel, but let's not kid ourselves." Karoline sat across from her, brushing rain from her blazer. "He's not bluffing." Juliet didn't blink. "No, but neither are we." The next call went to Nicholas. She told him everything. What Caleb looked like, what he said, the photo. There was silence on the line for a long moment before Nicholas replied, voice low but steady. "I'll move locations. I'll contact my team. But Karoline, don't let them scare you out of the truth. That's what they count on." She ended the call and stared out the window. Somewhere in the distance, she imagined Vaughn watching again, testing her resolve. She didn't feel like a warrior, but warriors didn't always look like fighters. Sometimes they looked like press secretaries, or journalists, or librarians carrying paper trails with blood on them. Sentinel had issued its first warning. Now it was her turn. The safe house's kitchen was quiet, too quiet for what it was becoming. A command post, a newsroom, and a bunker all at once. Karoline stood at the counter, flipping through duplicate case files, double-checking names, timestamps, transfer numbers. The work didn't stop, not because it couldn't, but because it shouldn't. That's how whistleblowers died. That's how good men lost wars they didn't know they were fighting, but something was off. The burner phone they used for secure communications pinged twice that morning. Once from Nicholas sending coordinates for a new Boston safe point, and once from someone labeled simply as SH. Sabrina Hall. Karoline had hired Sabrina 6 months earlier, young, sharp, campaign finance focused, recommended by someone on the Hill. She wasn't flashy, but she was good. Always quiet in meetings, always early to court, and most important, or so Karoline thought. The text was a simple one. Ellen Reyes is too exposed. Suggest moving her before press event. It sounded right, reasonable, the kind of thing a seasoned aide would say. But there was one problem. Ellen wasn't scheduled to attend the press event. Only 4 people knew that. Karoline's fingers froze on the edge of the file. A single sentence from Juliet echoed in her mind. If they're watching us this closely, they've either tapped our devices or they've got someone inside. Karoline stood slowly and walked into the back office, where Juliet and Liam were watching street surveillance feeds and monitoring social chatter for signs of Sentinel's media proxies. I need the last 48 hours of Sabrina's device traffic, Karoline said flatly. Juliet blinked, caught off guard. You think she's compromised? I think it's worse than that, Karoline said. I think she was never clean to begin with. It didn't take long. Liam was surgical. Within minutes, he'd pulled metadata from a supposedly secure email Sabrina had sent to a legal contact the previous evening. The message summary was innocuous. Language about timing, filings, the upcoming federal injunction. But the recipient? A masked domain, rerouted through Luxembourg, matching a digital signature previously flagged by Liam when he traced Sentinel's Cayman Island charities. Sabrina had leaked the press schedule, and more. She gave them Ellen's location, Liam said, his voice grim, and the timing of your next submission to the court. Karoline's throat tightened, not from fear, from fury. She found Sabrina alone in the upstairs hallway, phone in hand, pretending to read legal summaries on her tablet. Karoline said nothing at first, just stared. Then, quietly, "Who owns you?" Sabrina looked up, startled. For a moment her composure held, until it didn't. Her face crumpled like a building mid-chop. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." "But you did," Karoline said. "They came to me 6 weeks ago. Said they knew about my father's debts, the money we owe for his medical bills, my sister's tuition. I thought if I just passed along general schedules, nothing too specific, then no one would get hurt. I didn't know they'd move on Ellen." Karoline stood still, no shouting, no grand accusations, just one sentence, razor sharp. "You knew what they were capable of." Sabrina's eyes welled. "I'm sorry, Karoline. I was scared." Karoline nodded. "So am I. But I didn't sell my fear to the highest bidder." She turned to leave, then paused at the stairs. "You're going to stay here, under guard," she said. "If you so much as touch your phone again, it won't be Sentinel you have to worry about." Juliet met her at the bottom of the stairs. "What do we do with her?" "We isolate her, and we resecure Ellen's transport. Now." Liam chimed in from the back room. "One more thing," he called. "Caleb Vaughn was spotted 2 blocks from Ellen's safe house. He's circling." Karoline didn't wait. She grabbed her coat, opened the door, and stepped into the Charleston heat. The city felt different now, closer, louder, like a kettle building pressure. She knew this wasn't just surveillance anymore. This was open warfare. She'd lost someone inside her own walls, and now the only thing keeping her team alive was speed and truth. The betrayal burned, but the mission remained. By dawn, Charleston Hall was no longer just a courthouse. It was a fortress. Ringed with satellite trucks, a cordon of police cruisers, and a restless crowd that stretched down the marble steps into the square. The city's old men in baseball caps, welders and pipe fitters on day off, retirees who remembered when things were simpler, they all showed up, not for the spectacle, but for the promise that just maybe, today was the day someone would finally tell the truth to power. Karoline Leavitt arrived with her head held high. The lines beneath her eyes were deeper now, her hair pulled back tight. If she was afraid, she didn't show it. She had become the axis on which the whole town turned. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters filled the back rows, pens poised, microphones blinking. The local news had never seen numbers like this. Even the national networks were there, ready to beam Charleston's reckoning into millions of living rooms. At the front, Judge Everhart presided in his robe, face composed but lips drawn tight. His silver hair shone under the spotlights, but his hands gripped the bench a bit too firmly. The bailiff called the court to order. The whispers fell silent. Karoline took the stand, folder in hand, eyes fixed not on the judge but on the jury, on the faces of everyday men who'd worked fields, run factories, fixed cars, men who'd lost trust in institutions but hadn't yet lost hope. Everhart cleared his throat. "Mrs. Leavitt, you are here today as a witness to alleged misconduct involving Liberty Dominion PAC, the Renaissance Fund, and this court. Do you have evidence to present?" Karoline's voice was steady. "Yes, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I'd like to submit several exhibits for the record." She turned to the jury, letting her words carry past Everhart's bench. "These documents show a pattern of financial transactions. Funds funneled through shell companies, then distributed to political campaigns and non-profits run by members of this court's administration. Some of those funds, I allege, were in exchange for legal outcomes, verdicts bought and paid for." Everhart's jaw flexed. "Allegations require evidence, not opinion." Karoline nodded, meeting his gaze. "Let's begin with Exhibit A. Liam Tran, seated behind the prosecution table, activated a secured digital display. The first document appeared, a wire transfer receipt for $1,200,000 from the Renaissance Fund to the Oak Foundation, signed electronically by Judge Everhart himself. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A man in the front row muttered, "God Almighty." Karoline continued. Exhibit B, email correspondence between Liberty Dominion's chief counsel and the Southbridge Legal Initiative discussing exited processing of pending cases, with a note to clear it with Raven. Raven, as we can now confirm, is Judge Everhart's internal code name. The judge's face flushed, but he remained silent. Exhibit C, a voice recording, extracted from the encrypted drive provided by Derek Wallace, former Liberty Dominion fundraiser. In this clip, Judge Everhart is heard negotiating terms. If the lawsuit is dismissed quietly, another $500,000 goes through Pinebridge. No loose ends. The playback echoed through the silent room. For a moment, Everhart seemed smaller, shoulders hunched as if the words themselves weighed him down. Exhibit D, confirmation from a federal auditor, Anna Kessler, that these transactions violate campaign finance laws and appear to constitute bribery under federal statute. Everhart interrupted, voice hoarse. "This is inadmissible. No authentication." The prosecution objected. "Your Honor, the chain of custody is clear, and the FBI has verified the digital evidence." The judge tried to rally. "I remind you, Mrs. Leavitt, that this court is not a theater for political ambition." Karoline stood taller, eyes burning. "With respect, Your Honor, this is not theater, it is the people's house. And I stand here because too many have been silenced for too long." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Outside, the crowd's chants filtered in, "Justice for Charleston," over and over, like the rolling surf. Suddenly, the doors burst open. A squad of federal agents entered, led by Special Agent Morales. The judge's gavel slammed, but the sound was drowned out by the surge of adrenaline in the room. "Judge Malcolm Everhart," Morales announced, "by order of the Department of Justice, you are under arrest for bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. You will surrender yourself into federal custody." Everhart staggered back, robe billowing. "This is a witch hunt. I have served this court for decades." Morales signaled, and the bailiffs moved in. Everhart's hands shook as they slipped the cuffs on. His eyes darted, first to Karoline, then to the gallery, and finally to the camera lenses capturing his fall. As the agents led him out, the courtroom filled with noise, reporters shouting questions, the crowd outside breaking into applause. Karoline did not move. She stood at the center, the nation's gaze upon her, a symbol not just of resistance but of responsibility. Juliet Moore pushed through the scrum to Karoline's side. Her voice was hoarse but triumphant. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." But Karoline shook her head. She was thinking of Vaughn, of Sentinel, of the threat that remained in the shadows. "This isn't over," she replied softly. Everhart was just one piece. Still for a moment she allowed herself to feel the weight lift. A lifetime's worth of secrets finally spoken aloud, and a room full of men, hardened by disappointment, watching one of their own take the stand and not flinch. Outside, the crowd surged forward as Karoline emerged. Some reached out to touch her hand, others simply nodded. A silent salute. Above it all, the bell in St. Michael's rang out. 12 times, the city's past and present converging, as if to say, today, Charleston remembered what justice could look like. Karoline met Nicola's eyes at the edge of the crowd. He gave a single, proud nod, the kind you give when words don't suffice. She smiled, small, tired, but real. As she stood on the courthouse steps, Karoline Leavitt understood, sometimes justice wasn't a verdict, it was a reckoning, a moment when the truth, after a lifetime of being buried, finally saw daylight. But as the sun rose higher, she knew her work was only beginning. The fall of Judge Everhart sent shockwaves through the justice system. But for Karoline Leavitt, it felt less like an ending and more like the opening of a second front. In the days that followed his arrest, headlines erupted across the country. White House press secretary exposes judicial bribery network. Charleston courtroom turns federal Everhart in custody. Allegations mount. But beneath the noise, a darker current pulled at her attention. One that led straight to the name she feared most: Sentinel. Juliette Moore, ever the reporter, was already digging. In the quiet of the safe house, she read aloud from decrypted internal memos pulled from Liberty Dominion's abandoned cloud server. Each message was clinical, corporate, and damning. One memo stood out: all judicial pipeline approvals require Sentinel sign-off. Phase 2 begins post-Everhart. Karoline leaned forward. Phase 2? Juliette nodded grimly. This wasn't about Everhart. He was just the doorman. Sentinel's structure goes deeper: political funding networks, media surrogates, enforcement contracts. And if this memo is right, they're already moving. Then Liam Tran entered the room, face pale. He dropped a printed email onto the table. Encrypted comms between Sentinel and a political action group in D.C., he said. It's signed by a familiar name, Senator Raymond Duke. Karoline's stomach turned. Duke, senior senator from Virginia, veteran, decorated, and untouchable. He'd shaken her hand 3 times during White House briefings, spoke about ethics, like he invented the word. Now he was a thread connected to every dollar, traced back to Liberty Dominion and the Renaissance Fund. Is he Sentinel? She asked. Liam hesitated. Not the whole thing, but he's a gatekeeper. Could be the front, could be the finance arm, but either way, he's in it, Juliette chimed in. And if he falls, the network crumbles. Karoline exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of it all. The judge was gone, yes, but Sentinel wasn't a man. It was a structure, a system, a shadow command, and now the machine had seen her face, heard her voice, and felt its own walls shake. A burner phone buzzed. A text appeared. No number. Just a sentence. You toppled a puppet. Now let's see if you can find the hand. Karoline read it aloud. Silence fell over the room. I know what this is, she said. It's not a warning, it's a challenge. Juliette nodded. And the deeper we go, the more dangerous it gets. Karoline rose from the table. Her eyes locked on the Charleston skyline outside the window. Then let's go deeper. It was a quiet morning in Charleston's Liberty Square. The kind of morning that smelled like salt air and sounded like seagulls chasing nothing. The storm had passed, but the weight of it still lingered. Karoline Leavitt stood beneath the bronze statue of a revolutionary soldier, surrounded not by cameras or podiums, but by people, ordinary citizens who had shown up with folded lawn chairs, thermoses of black coffee, and signs that read, "Justice is American, and one voice still matters." The crowd was older, factorymen with hard hands, Vietnam vets in denim jackets, women who remembered segregated schoolhouses, and men who fought in Korea. They didn't come for spectacle. They came because something had been stirred in them. Something that reminded them of how this country used to feel, before headlines became theater and truth became optional. A makeshift stage had been set up with plywood and red, white, and Jew bunting, faded at the edges. Juliette Moore stood nearby, leaning on the railing, arms folded, a rare softness in her eyes. Karoline stepped forward, no speech in hand, just her truth. Justice, she said, isn't something you find in marble buildings. It's something you fight for in the dirt. It's what you protect when no one's watching. And it's what you leave behind when your name's forgotten. The crowd was silent, but their eyes, those eyes told her everything. They weren't just seeing her, they were seeing themselves. Their kids, their grandkids, the America they wanted to believe in, maybe one last time. Behind her, Marcus Tate unveiled a plaque mounted on a stone base. It read, "In honor of the citizens who chose truth over comfort," and to Karoline Leavitt for reminding us that the fight never ends. Karoline turned to see it, jaw tightening, not out of pride, but weight. The kind of weight that doesn't lift, the kind you carry because you must. Later that evening, she sat with Nicholas on the front porch of a borrowed townhouse near the harbor. No cameras, no emails, just the sound of wind through live oaks. He handed her a folded piece of paper. On it, a child's drawing of Karoline standing at a microphone with the words, "She told the truth, she didn't stop." "She mailed it to the office," Nicholas said. "Said her dad watches your hearings on YouTube." Karoline traced the crayon lines with her thumb. "They'll try to bury this again," she said. "They always do," Nicholas replied. "But now, they have to dig through you first," she smiled, tired but sure. "Because some legacies aren't written in laws or headlines. They're written in the lives you shield, the silence you shatter, and the line you refuse to let them cross. Even when it costs you everything." At its core, the reckoning at Charleston Hall teaches us that the pursuit of justice is rarely clean and never easy, but always necessary. Karoline Leavitt's journey from White House press secretary to reluctant warrior against institutional corruption reminds us that truth doesn't rise on its own, it must be carried by those willing to risk their name, safety, and reputation to defend it. In exposing Judge Everhart and standing against the shadow network known as Sentinel, Karoline showed that systems of power, no matter how entrenched, can be shaken by evidence, courage, and conviction. The story also reminds us that betrayal often comes from within, and trust is as fragile as it is powerful. Yet even in the face of surveillance, threats, and betrayal, Karoline never allowed fear to dictate her choices. Instead, she leaned on unlikely allies, drew strength from community, and stayed grounded in principle. For an America too often discouraged by scandal fatigue and institutional failure, this story offers a rare but vital reminder. One person, rooted in truth, backed by the people, can hold the powerful accountable. Justice isn't an outcome, it's a responsibility. And silence is never neutral when the stakes are this high.